Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Suzanne Minton. I'm the Director of Content Strategy at Certara. This webinar is brought to you by Certara, where we accelerate medicines using proprietary biosimulation software, technology, and services to transform traditional drug discovery and development. Our clients include more than 2,000 biopharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, and regulatory agencies across more than 62 countries. Before we begin, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. If you experience technical difficulties, please message the organizers using the chat panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. We'll email you a link to the recording within the next few days. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send your questions in at any time during the presentation. We'll collect them and address them at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is Synchrogenix Writer, medical writing software that automates data and your workflow processes. Our speakers are Trevor Standish and Gabriella Mangino. Trevor is currently a Director of Product Management at Certara. He has vast experience in developing product strategy, roadmaps, and requirements with cross-functional teams to launch successful software products. He spent the last decade creating and managing disruptive technologies in finance, marketing, and the pharmaceutical industry. Gabby's currently a product manager at Certara. She has years of patient narrative production and project lead experience in the pharmaceutical industry. At Certara, she works with commercial and services groups to help develop and improve the software that supports our technology-enabled authoring capabilities. Gabby and Trevor, welcome to today's webinar. I'll now turn it over to them to begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending and joining today. It looks like we have a lot of individuals joining, so we're super excited about that. And you know, we're going to have this event and several other throughout the course of the year, so we can encourage you to keep attending, and we're really looking forward to kind of sharing what we have, our vast knowledge experience in various products. So today we're going to talk about Synchrogenix Writer, and Synchrogenix Writer is a software product we have at Certara. We have various different software products and additional services, but today's focus is really on this product. So let's get right into it. We have about an hour, and we want to make sure that we do cover our topics in addition to getting to see a demo, kind of getting to see how the software works in real time, and ensuring we have time for questions at the end. So if we could, let's go to our first slide. So just to give you a little bit of history about Certara and specifically for Synchrogenix Writer, we want to actually go back a couple years. So we want to go back to 2020. It was a little crazy that year. I'm sure we all aged a little bit more than we expected. But essentially, Certara has this history of bringing innovative software and solutions available to users, teams, and the community. And so back in 2020, we actually formed this multidisciplinary team, and we'll talk about it in a moment, focused on the authoring, writing, especially in the medical and regulatory space, to start talking about this problem that kind of keeps coming up time and time again in terms of writing takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time. How do we bridge that gap? And so we established the team, we got together, and we effectively set out upon this multi-year product vision, which we do have a quite extensive roadmap about how we are going to address this, not only today, but in 2022, 2023, and all the way for the next 10 years. And what we did is we said, okay, let's go ahead and start our first execution of our phase and launch this product, Synchrogenix Writer, and get the plans in motion to do so. So if you fast forward, which was last year, we actually launched Synchrogenix Writer. That was about 9-10 months ago, with a lot of great success. We had a lot of good feedback, and effectively it was the first, we want to say, stepping stone to what we call enterprise automation. So when we think about authoring and medical writing, we don't think about it just like in the sense of hands on the keyboard to write the documents and write the content about the outcomes of like things like trials, but we think about, well, what are all the things, the work that surrounds the work? Not only writing, but QC and communication and collaboration, all those different elements that go into the authoring process that our community participates in. It's much more than hands on the keyboard for that. And so in our initial launch, we were able to see a huge success in terms of automation, specifically around patient narratives. We'll talk about that today. We can talk about other documentation, kind of later on or in other subsequent webinars. But essentially, we saw that our new customers and our new users, we saw a really good benchmark of exceeding at least a 50% degree of automation in their first types of documents. Patient narratives and patient profiles is what we focused on. And that has varying degrees in terms of the automation. It kind of depends on 3 different variables. We'll just say a person's skill and expertise with the software, the amount of, the consistency and the amount of data you have going into it, and then the presentation of your template or document itself. And so we saw some really good uptake, and we kind of used 50% or more as a benchmark when we addressed these types of automation problems. And we saw teams that blew past that and far exceeded that, going to 70, 80, 90, even in some cases 100% automation in their documentation process. And that was really encouraging. And that was just essentially with our version 1 of the software. So very promising results. And we were happy that we were able to do that. And if you fast forward then to today, what brings us to April 26th in 2022, what we've seen since then is these small teams of our customers, they've actually produced over 10,000 documents, narratives, and profiles through the software. Within our first year, it's not even our 1-year anniversary of the software being available. We have another release actually coming out next month, which is great, and it's actually driving further automation, whether it be through clicks or capabilities and things of that nature. And one of the things is we're going to take all those learnings that we have for what we've really addressed as, just call it V1 or first year of product launch, and expand from the narratives and the profiles to include other types of documents in our module 5. So things like clinical study reports and protocols and some other documents that we've had a lot of feedback and requests for. So we're going to kind of be pivoting and expanding those capabilities throughout 2022. But today's session is really focused on the current capabilities around what Synchrogenix Writer can do today and what we're doing in terms of the product with patient narratives and profiles. So Gabby, I'll kind of give you a moment to jump in and we can talk a little bit about our background here.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. So technology meets medical writing. Why do we need technology for medical writing? And in the very simplest of terms, it's to make our jobs easier. So coming from a background in this industry, initially I started off as a technical editor, and then I moved on to medical writing and project management and all of these various tasks within the medical writing and regulatory writing realm. I found so many of these tasks to be very tedious, time-consuming, working with large amounts of data, dense data, complex data, and having to manually write it to a template. So perhaps you have all your sources pulled up on one screen and your template to the right, and you are manually writing, looking at your sources on the left and filling in that information on the right. It takes up a lot of time, and frankly, time that us medical writers, technical editors don't have time to be doing and reviewing in full from template to template. Submission leads, medical writers, technical editors, project managers, stats programmers are all people who are working with data. They're all manually writing to templates to produce studies for submission. And they're finding lots of steps in the workflow to be very tedious, very inefficient when kind of doing them fully manual. So in comes technology to make the process much more efficient, and the launch of Synchrogenix Writer. We have always been using an internal tool starting back from 2017 that enabled us to automate parts of narrative templates because we saw the benefit in using that technology early on. And we were lucky enough to be able to then get a kind of full software team in place to give birth to Synchrogenix Writer. And Trevor, do you want to speak a little bit to your team and how you've kind of put together this software for use for our customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you teed it up pretty nice, Gabby. Your experience as a medical writer, as a technical editor, someone like myself, I don't have that experience. I'm essentially if you were to segment this into left and right, Gabby's, her experiences on the left-hand side, and a lot of those teams that we worked with, and my experience came from the right-hand side. And I think you see this a lot in different technologies that come into place, but unless you kind of marry the two together to create a solution that works for technical editors, that works for writers, you can get these other types of products that don't really help that much or not conducive to the real work that's going on. So going back to that history we talked about, when we had that multidisciplinary team, we said, we really need everybody. We need medical writers. We need UI UX designers. We need programmers. We need developers. And through that collaborative effort, we saw really the potential of what could be with this product. And so far, we've had really good receptive feedback, but we're just kind of getting started. And I think that is essentially one of the differentiating factors, the benefits to our customers, is we see that the system is designed for those individuals in mind, those technical editors, the Gabbies of the world who have that experience. And it's not made by some developer in a room that whittles away and then has this grand unveiling. We think about our community, our medical writers, our technical editors, first and foremost, because it has to work for them. And that really speaks to adoption, ease of use, and having a familiar look and feel for this space.
Absolutely. So giving you an overview of Synchrogenix Writer, it's a purpose-built writing software for the pharma industry that encompasses organization, collaboration, and automation. And you'll see these three components come to life with the demo that I'll be providing, as well as our further conversation in this webinar. Really what we're doing is we're harnessing kind of the power and the efficiency and the consistency of technology to assist with our medical writing tasks. So in doing that, we're empowering writers or reviewers to focus on other higher priority tasks within submissions. We are ensuring consistency and quality through standardization, something that we live by in this industry as medical writers, technical editors. We are kind of driven by detail and consistency. And we're also able to increase the amount that we're able to output with a reduced time and cost behind it. So just making the drafting, production to finalization process more efficient from start to finish.
And just kind of to go over a little bit about how our customers adopt this, we think about medical writing and the whole regulatory space. It is a team sport. Nobody writes in isolation. Nobody works in isolation. So the first thing is, okay, this product has to be a web-based product, because we also oftentimes see our customers have writing teams that span multiple time zones. So that was something in terms of being collaborative is really essential. The other one is we're talking about highly secure data, right? And so we need to make sure it's validated. We get audited all the time. Some of our team members love it at this point. It's fully validated, it's secure, so that is of the utmost importance to us and all of our customers. It's a must. It's a prerequisite, we would say. Co-authoring. Again, it's not a team. It's a team sport in the authoring space and medical writing and regulatory, just broadly speaking. So we needed to make sure that was incorporated from the beginning of the onset of the application. And then also we needed to make sure that teams, if you want to go to the next one, next two, Gabby, make sure that you have support. So whenever you're adopting a new way of writing or new technology or just doing something new, right, you need some support. So we have 24/5 support, which is great. We have trainings, we have user guides, and that's really to ensure that teams can quickly ramp up to use the product, and it's not something that hasn't been thought through and it's kind of half-baked. We want to avoid that. And then the last one is, this was actually very important. This was one of the core pillars that when we talked a couple of years ago, is the system needs to essentially work for everybody. It needs to work for large teams. It needs to work for small teams. It needs to work for different types of presentations for different documents. It also needs to work for different trials and different therapeutic areas. So the system needs to essentially be adaptable and configurable to work with each of those things in mind, because we know that not all writers write the same, not all teams work the same, not all trials are conducted the same, obviously. So it is flexible to meet those various needs, just depending on the size of your organization or the size of your team. And I think one of the things we'll get to at the end, we're going to talk about some key points of adoption and key points about like metrics and tracking. But we see that when we have a customer come to us, they say, you know, we need to solve this. For example, we need to increase the output per writer. So we see people actually driving towards that as a main thing. 1.5 to 2.5 times, just depending on the skill and the expertise and how they use the software. A lot of people have too many meetings. I'm double booked right now, actually, as we give this webinar. So we want to reduce the number of meetings, content reviews, structure outlines, all those kind of nuanced meetings that take place sometimes over days, weeks, months. And we want to essentially take the entire writing process, not just your fingers on the keyboard, but the work of doing the work and centralizing that in one space, so you can go from start to finish and having it all in one space, and you don't have to kind of jump out to a different software. You don't have to go to a different document management software and maybe do things like that. So it's all done in one space. And these are kind of typical benefits or reasons why customers come to us. They're trying to address 1, 2, or maybe all 3 of these, depending on their goals.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the demo, Trevor, a location for writing, working with your source data, and producing your templates as well. So I'm going to go ahead and now share my web browser, which is where I have Synchrogenix Writer pulled up. And I want to cover a few different topics relating to the software. First, as we mentioned, it is web-based. And why is this important? It is facilitating that team effort, that global team use. So you'll see I simply log on to my application, select the particular project that I want to work in, and I will be able to access the software, whichever projects fall within that particular area, and as many projects as I've set up. So this is really great in facilitating multiple team members being able to use the software at once in a secure space for all of their project needs. So one of the other things that I want to highlight, aside from this being a web-based application, is that we can set permissions, or our customers can set permissions to who is able to use the particular project application and work within that particular project. So we have a special user permissions page that enables us to add users to a project as we're working, or as our customers are working. So what this looks like is we would go in and select a project, and we would be able to assign users to it. And we're able to assign users to specific user tasks within that project as well. So if I wanted a user to just be able to work on a particular template, if I wanted them to work on a particular subject list as it pertains to narratives, if I want them to just be able to review the template, or perhaps generate another piece of the template, they could do that as well. So you'll see within this view, if I wanted to add a new team member, I could select that team member and also assign permissions for that team member on the team. And this is really great for collaborating efforts, but also assists from a project management standpoint in the project. How can you most easily identify the team members on your project, what specific roles that they're assigned to, and kind of manage your project and your workflow directly from within the software.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Gabby. It's, you know, the benefit is you effectively can determine on your own, or as an administrator, what is appropriate for an individual team member to have in terms of contribution. Some being small teams, you might have everybody contributing. If you have, you know, 4 writing teams, you might not want each of the teams seeing the various data sets or the various projects. So it gives you essentially the flexibility to control that, you know, security aspects with those roles and rights.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to focus on was actually working within the templates, but more importantly, working with the data set for your project. So thinking about this kind of demo, our case study is our patient narratives or patient safety narratives or profiles. What we're doing is we're working with the data directly for the project. And that means we're using the clinical data set, so the SCTM or ADAMS data set, which is CDISC compliance, and we're working directly with that data set to actually write our narratives and write our templates. So we have a few different options for uploading our data. As you'll see, I have all the comprehensive data tables for my SCTM data. And then furthermore, within the project, I can actually view the data as I work. So I'm going to show you that piece and how critical it is to actually work with a data set as you're creating your template. This is fostering kind of a higher quality template. So in the past, I've worked with medical writing teams that might develop a patient narrative template that looks great in theory, right? It's aligned with the style guide. It seems to contain all of the data files or the data fields that would need to be pulled in for that particular study. But then ultimately, maybe it doesn't match great with the actual data that was collected for that study. So in that kind of template development, there was a low data visibility. And for that reason, the data isn't necessarily written as it should be, as clean as it could be, as clearly as it could be. And maybe some data fields are missing. So when our customers are working within Synchrogenix Writer, they have full visibility to the data as they're building out their template. So as they're building out each section of their template, they're actually able to go in and view the particular data that they're interested in pulling in for that particular section. So if
Gabby, I'm going to jump in real quick.
yeah.
There was a really emergent outcome we saw with some of our customers about working with the data, and I thought it was pretty important to kind of drill on that, is that a lot of the time, depending on the team and the organization, there was several steps in the process going from, okay, we have a data lock and we, we're scrubbing our data, making sure it's CDISC compliant, to passing off some information to the writing team. There might be 2, 3, 4 steps, maybe profiles are generated or some tables. And some of the teams we saw who adopt this completely eliminated those steps because they went straight from data to authoring. And so they were able to actually reduce their overall time, just call it overall from start to finish authoring time by days, if not weeks, because they removed several people or teams in that process. So keep going, Gabby. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I'll show you within our kind of study data area within our software here is if I want to view the DM data, demographics data for the study at any time, I can right click, view that data, it's going to pop out in a new window. So think about what the purpose of listings or patient profiles are. It's showing the writer and the technical editor data in a way that is readable to the writer and technical editor. In this case, the users of the software who are writers, editors, they have that same capability to view data within the software, although they're not relying on that output generated from a stats team. They don't need listings. They don't need patient profiles to be able to review, view, synthesize data from the data set. So you'll see in my demographics table, I can see everything for this particular study, every patient and all of that patient's demographic information. If I want to search for specific terms, perhaps I want to see how often a particular event of interest is occurring, I can use the search option, and I have all of the data at my fingertips across all tables or all domains within the data set. So this is very important for enabling me to find the data that I need to write to my template and verify that I'm not missing something that might be captured in the data set and isn't ultimately portrayed in my template. So kind of the last piece I want to cover within the software, so we have our global team accessibility through it being web-based. We have the ability to work with data directly. And now we have the abilities to preview the data as we're working, as well as be able to format the data how we want to see it in line with our template. So our customers are finding this software to kind of be a blend of, working with perhaps a stats program like SAS and a program like Microsoft Word, where you can work with data, but you can also format it exactly how you're looking to see that data within your final template. So the software team has really implemented these great kind of formatting and text features directly within the software that enable me to format text as a user, determine layout, margins, all of those very important kind of style guide driven edits that I would need to make on a particular template, which I can do all within a software. And as I'm doing this in my software and as I'm building this out for each of my unique templates, I know that all of those very specific changes, all of those modifications, formatting options that I apply on the template are going to apply to everyone. So thinking about patient safety narratives, we see my subject list here. I may have hundreds of patients that meet criteria. Each of those patients is going to have a unique template generated for them, right? That's going to contain all of their qualifying events for writing. And I know in the template that I'm building out and I'm formatting at the same time that it's going to be consistent for everyone. So beyond just being able to format my templates, populate my data within my template, I can also preview it in real time to the particular patient for narratives in this case that template will apply to, and where I will see the data for that patient ultimately populate. So if I go to my demographic information section of this particular template, I'll be able to work with that particular demographic data for that patient and have a preview of that information populating within the template below.
Yeah, one thing is if you and I were writing together, maybe I was the writer and you were the reviewer. One of the big things we see users do is that there's no delay in changes, like you were saying. If we don't like the presentation of the text, or maybe the data was all caps or really anything like that, we just make the change and it's done for all of the narratives simultaneously. And the delay is the amount of time, so call it 2 seconds to make that change. So it's a huge time savings to teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see me kind of switch between a few different patients here to change my view. And I could see in this particular patient, kind of my template all coming together, as well as my criteria event populating one event for this particular patient. There are some things I'm seeing here. This font's a little bit smaller. I'm using woman versus man. Maybe I want to use male, female. I'm seeing some things in my preview that I ultimately want to address and clean up. So that's why the preview feature is so valuable and gives me kind of real-time insight into the qualifying events for each patient as well. So just to show you a quick look at what it actually looks like to populate your template using data within your data set, it's a simple drag and drop. And aside from the drag and drop, you have the option to customize data and display it in a manner that you like to see. So that could be fully capital letters, could be all lowercase letters, it could be a specific presentation for your date, a certain date format, and things of that nature. Again, modifications that you can make to data that a writer would ultimately need to make that you can do directly in the software as you're building out your template. So I'm just going to write a little bit different narrative from the one you see above. And we will see my preview actually update as I'm working. So if I want to type out subject, I want to drag and drop my subject ID, I will actually see that preview update as I'm working. So really great feature. Just going to turn it off for a moment so that we can see that populate. And let me show you what this mistake would look like. If I had pulled in that subject ID twice, I would see it twice in my preview, know that that's an error, and I could delete it. So these are really kind of a few of the things I wanted to touch on in this kind of high level demonstration of the software. If I wanted to make any more of those advanced edits, for example, I could right click on a data field, I could go into my field settings, and I could modify the way that the data is actually displayed within my template. All of these things are very important as we're trying to make our processes more efficient. We're trying to kind of greaten the automation with each template that we produce and reduce those manual edits. And we're also trying to create a more efficient workflow overall and apply consistency and standardization to all the work that we do along the way. So our customers are truly finding using this software to be extremely valuable, especially when it comes to producing patient narratives in high volume in an expedited timeline. And we find that the user interface that they're working with, they're very happy with. It's user friendly. Again, it integrates a lot of these Microsoft Word features. And it just makes it a very easy platform for medical writers and editors to work in to get this very tedious work done on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Gabby, because we talked about the 3 pillars of the product, about focusing on high value types of activities in the writing space, right? Everyone who does medical writing is very talented, and so when we think about high value, we don't think about formatting a capital F across 500 patient narratives in Word as a high value type of activity. So I think as you're like showing here, there's a ton of different kind of customization settings. In this case, if you said the sex equal to F is going to show female, now for all those patients in the trial who have this, it's all going to display the same, and you don't have to go back and say, oh, these first 10 say F, these next 10 say female, these next 10 say woman, like whatever they might say, they'll all display this effectively the same across any number of patient narratives or profiles, whatever you're working on.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and reshare the presentation.
Thank you for the demo, Gabby.
Absolutely. Just go ahead and change my view. There you go.
Okay. Okay, so when we think about software or any kind of technology, there's always a lot of elements to making that a reality for your team and your organization. When you say, okay, great, we see a potential in using this tool, we see a potential in using this software, this application, there's always like, okay, well, what's next? How do we actually take this idea and this conceptual benefits and put this into practice? And for all you on the call who are not existing customers who are using the software today, you have the benefit of taking all the learnings from those who have come before you and making it easier to adopt and deploy this to your organization, to your team. So we have kind of 3 main areas that we focus on, and depending on the customer, it really depends on how much kind of effort or assistance we can provide when putting this new technology into practice. And the first one is process. So the biggest one we see is aligning on process in terms of goals and defining success. Sometimes teams or organizations, or like we have R&D teams sometimes that will put this into play. They write what we call like software charters or success charters, which essentially outline what they would consider success when they adopt this for their organization. So that's really like a pretty common practice these days we see. You always wanted to give training for users. So, you know, this is new, like anything else. Nobody just picks something up and becomes an expert on any kind of technology, whether you're talking about driving a car, medical writing, or anything else. So have training, have those supplemental materials, and then identify, this was a big one that we saw, identifying how this tool, how this software fits in the ecosystem of your technology. People have, you know, Word, they use Word. People have document management systems. Some have other kind of automation tools that they have used in the past. So seeing how this fits in the broader picture is really important to understand. You know, it actually ladders up to those goals and success. And then setting criteria and milestones. And so it's not as if you flip a switch and then your team or your organization is all of a sudden automating all things automagically in one day. It's a process. People have milestones and different degrees of automation as they go. The second one is people. You know, without people, technology cannot really exist, and it serves no value. So going back to our teams and our medical writers, often companies and customers have multiple stakeholders that are not just the users, but team members or directors, and they often span different departments or different groups in the organization, in addition to your IT. IT is always they like to have a say in things, and they're also very important, so invite them to the meetings. And, you know, specify key team members for training, adoption. Sometimes people call like team leads who help facilitate the adoption throughout the organization as like team leads or super users. We've heard, you know, there's various titles that different groups use. And then assigning specific tasks and roles. Gabby kind of talked about that in the demo. And then educating, this is a big one, is about spending a little time to educate writers about that data. So as you showed us, Gabby, you have access to the data, you have direct link to when you're authoring to see it. So it actually might behoove you to have a session about, so what is SDTM data? What is CDIS data? You know, what should I look for? What is a domain? You know, DM. And that goes a long way. And that's information that just really amplifies an individual's contribution and actually makes them that much more efficient as they kind of go through their ascendance through the mastery of the software.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, your writers are familiar with working with patient profiles and listings. It's a very quick learning curve to learn to use SDTM and Adams data in the same way to find the data that you need. And it's kind of a great perk in the industry to, you know, understand what data fields mean. And when you review an annotated, you know, case report form, you'll understand the annotation. So it's a little bit of a perk to actually be able to understand, you know, what is SCTM data and what is CDIS compliance, and be able to work with all the data at your fingertips in one software. And the last piece of this is practice, right? You want to actually put using the software into practice, and you want to adopt it into your current process and with your current people. So once you kind of pass those two steps, now you're using the software, and you really want to target trials that require over 25 patient narratives, for example. So when thinking about consistency and standardization and kind of reusability of a template, you do want to actually target studies that are a little bit larger and kind of see those efficiency gains and that standardization applied across all templates when you have multiple versions of that document. Of course, as we mentioned as well, it's important that the data is CDIS compliant. When working within the software, you know, you want to ensure that your links between certain data domains are there, that obviously the data that you might be requesting in your template is actually captured within the data set, and that it's formatted appropriately. And these are all things that go with CDIS compliance. You also want to establish a center of excellence for people, materials, best practices, etc. So set up, meetings, places, opportunities for your team to kind of connect as they go through the process and as they're putting these things into practice. So how can you create kind of best practices documents that you can use internally? Findings, of course, every project that you work on might be a lessons learned for kind of findings and things that you adapt into your next project as you use the software, and so on. And to hone in on that reusability, or recyclability, as I like to think of it as, of templates, you want to identify portions of content which never need to be written again. So whether we're talking about patient narrative templates, clinical study report templates, so many organizations, likely yours, are working off of the same exact templates across each studies. They may be tweaked specific to rare disease, certain therapeutic areas, you might want to tweak them, but you're using the same exact template. You're saying patient across the same template. You're not using subject, you're using patient. And these are the things that, don't need to be written again and again when you can automate them. From, presentation of data perspective to basic formatting. There's no need to reformat a document over and over again. And what Synchrogenix Writer enables you to do is reuse the past work that you have performed to create a template. Reuse entire templates or particular sections of a template for all your future projects. So putting that into practice, you'll quickly see you're cutting out that time that you took in that very first project to set up the template. With now you're on project 2, you don't need to set up that template. Maybe you don't even need to write samples or review to that template again. You're ready to go in your next project. You're saving time. A lot of that is in the kickoff of the project, and you're just gaining efficiency in the practice.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to wrap up. This is pretty important, so we might want to make sure we included it in this session today about, highlighting accomplishments through metrics and tracking. So again, my background, I've worked in automotive, I worked in analytics and marketing, and when you see organizations, let's just say like a Ford or a Comcast, they literally track everything. Everything's tracked. And one of the things we saw is sometimes through our customers, not everything's tracked. So Gabby, I think you said it really well the other day. Everyone knows this is kind of a huge effort that takes a lot of time, but nobody knows kind of quite how much time or quite how much effort. And so putting some kind of hard numbers to those intangible observations is a great way to make measurable, actionable types of approach. So we just want to talk about metrics, and this is really to give you a flavor for it. And so kind of 3 things really quick, because we do want to make sure we have enough time for some questions if there are any, or we can have follow-up sessions with individuals. Is kind of establish a baseline. So just a snapshot of how much time things take. I could tell you when we formed that multidisciplinary team, one of the big outcomes was that we saw that writing, actually the authoring of things like a patient narrative, there was equal amount of time to author as there was to actually QC the document. So QCing was of equal weight in terms of the overall time. Those are really important things to capture, and you want to create essentially a baseline metrics to kind of understand those. A couple just off the top of my head is, the number of days to complete the trial narratives since database lock, or you could look at the total amount of hours to write a given narrative. Back to your point before, Gabby, a lot of our customers target trials with 25 plus narratives, because what happens is the time per narrative drops significantly down to, sometimes less than a half an hour, if depending on your team size and how many there are. And then to your last point you made about identifying new content, after you write basically your first project, there are portions the team will never write again. They are just automated, and even if there's a new trial with new data, it's actually automated. So you never have to write a demographics introduction, or you never have to, create a new AE table, let's say. And then how to make that actionable is really just continuous improvement. So recording every time you guys write on a project, have a regroup or track that information, analyze, okay, did we do things faster? Do we do things slower? Did the QC take longer? So can we automate some of that QC in Writer? And then improve continuously. So look at those documents and say, okay, let's say automated 70% of this document. Can we now automate that last 30%? Most of the time the answer is yes. You just need to take a moment to think about that. And so metrics and tracking are a clear way which we find teams, and these are intended to be a starter place for you. So not all organizations have this, and not all teams, and some do. So kind of just take this as a introductory, let's say, to metrics and tracking and how you can perform your writing improvement using a software like this. And we love to have individual conversations just depending on what kind of information you have. So that's just a little bit about best practices and how you can be successful and scale this up throughout your teams.
All right, we want to open up the floor to everyone to submit questions, and let's have a discussion about, anything that you'd like to learn more about, anything we can help address after, we've gone through our content.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Trevor and Gabby, for that excellent presentation. I'd like to encourage our audience to ask our speakers questions by entering them into the questions panel. Can you let us know, how do I use our existing template in the software?
Do you want to take that, Gabby? And
sure. Yeah, so part of this comes with understanding that this would be breaking your current process, implementing a new software. So let's say you are writing manually, internally to a template that may or may not be annotated, have the red text, some tables for you to fill in, and some instructions how to fill them in. And your writers are used to writing manually to that template. Great, that is an existing template that can actually be very easily adapted into the software. So essentially what you would be doing is, in the same way that that template was built out in Word, you would instead be building it out within the software. So you could quite literally copy and paste your template sections into the software and then incorporate the data from your data set into those template sections and the template overall and those particular pieces as you're working. So you're doing kind of two jobs at once, in that you're kind of copying over the standard non-movable, never changing template text, as well as all of the formatting that goes with it. And you're also incorporating in the data fields that will ultimately be used in the writing of that template. So you're pulling in your demographics information, your adverse events information, medical history, concomitant medications, and so on. So it is a very kind of one-to-one adaptation process, and maybe you don't have a template in place. You can start by building out tables and running text just the same within the software and format it as you go along. So it's really been, the software's been created, as you said, by medical writers who have been using Microsoft Word for years and templates in Microsoft Word for years, and a very simple way to adapt your existing template within the software that way.
Thanks,
yeah,
Gabby.
I'm going to jump in too and just add, we saw that Word was just too slow effectively for this specific initiative. And it was exactly like you're saying, Gabby. It was, everyone has their standard Word document. They have some instructions, maybe some standard formatting, and you kind of have to start from there. Well, what we see, probably the most common use after you cut over that template, is you no longer need that Word template anymore. It kind of becomes the paperweight on your desk, if you will, metaphorically. But also because Writer at that point, you can load what you've done in that previous work, like you're describing, load your new data, and be 90% done with creating the documents for the new trial. And you just can't get that in Word. So.
Got it. Thank you. If a document has lots of running text and in-text tables throughout, will I be able to automate this?
Yeah, so this is kind of, we're thinking about, let's say, patient narratives, in that the presentation could be a hybrid between, looks like data dump tables for perhaps the first 75% of the template, followed by kind of a running text, some paragraphs at the tail end of the template. You know, you might be prone to think, okay, automation can really only populate tables and not necessarily running text, but that's not true at all with what you're able to do within this software. Any kind of data field that you're working with and you're putting into your template can be formatted just the same, whether it be in a sentence or within a table. So we found, you know, tremendous success with both patient profiles, so those are kind of longer summaries of data, as well as with individual patient narratives, whether safety or efficacy, which may be a little bit more running text. And we've seen success with a hybrid of the both. So it is very possible to kind of populate and, you know, like in the most sophisticated manner, be able to populate data, both the same running text and within tables.
Going back to that process comment I made, it's to this point, Gabby, when we see is sometimes teams had like data teams create those tables and then throw them into a document, and then the writers would have to deal with it, right? I'm probably describing years of your life at this point. Well, you know, a lot of the time the writing team would say, well, we don't want to present all that data, or we only want to present in a different way. And so it would introduce altering those automated tables and then having to QC it. Whereas in Writer, the writers get to determine the presentation and what data goes. So that speaks to that customer we talked about earlier, where they were actually be able to cut out multiple steps in their process that was really a lot more work for their data team.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like we have one more question after this. Looks like it's our last question from the audience. If reviewers are making updates, i.e. they're adding or deleting text, can another reviewer view what changes have made? That is to say, is there a track change mode to know what changes have been made?
We currently do not have a quote unquote track change. The answer, Suzanne, is actually yes. You can see that. So if you or Gabby write something, I'll also see that change happening in real time. That's one of the things that speeds up the process, is you have multiple writers in there, often working on different sections or different portions of a document at any given time. However, there's, without going into too much detail, there are some best practices from our users on how to keep track of that. And it's quite easy. So there are ways to overcome that.
Yeah, one example of that, Trevor, and it was something that had actually come up a few weeks ago, was kind of the burden of the review process on the reviewer. So thinking about, you know, the case study being patient narratives, reviewers often receive a written patient narrative, and they are prone to trying to QC it to the data set to find where data is coming from. You know, we're working with the safety data, working with the clinical data, and just trying to perform multiple tasks at once, aside from, you know, the most important task, which is reviewing the narrative. Does it make sense for this particular patient, and describing the event as accurately as possible in its relation to the study drug. So one of the options that we have within Synchrogenix Writer is being able to apply different font presentations, whether it be colors, bolding, underline, to the different data that you're pulling into the template, to the different data that is populated within your template. So if you want to see kind of your standard non-changing template text in one particular color, and then you want to see the data pulled from the clinical data set in a different color, the user of the software has the option to kind of make that distinction. If you want to distinguish between what is coming from the clinical database versus the safety database, you can do the same thing. And we find that when we would push such a version out to, you know, a reviewer, that their review is more focused. You know, they're only perhaps focusing on the clinical data piece. They're only focusing on the safety data piece. And because of that, the review is much quicker, more efficient, and comes back with fewer comments for incorporation, which is very important when we're talking about, you know, moving from the draft to the final version. So those are just some of the ways that we've, you know, with efficiency in mind, that we've adapted kind of features and functionality within the software to make a more efficient process.
Awesome. Thank you. Looks like we have one last question. Someone wants to know if it's possible to test the software.
So I don't know what context they mean test, but we can have a follow-up conversation about it. We have, you know, if they want to look to get a license or looking at to try it for a trial, yeah, we have tons of opportunities for that. It's quite conducive, and since it's web-based, it makes it pretty easy to just get in there and try it out. So happy to follow up with that individual.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Well, appreciate Gabby and Trevor for the presentation, and thanks so much to the audience for their attention and their questions. On behalf of Certara, I'd like to thank everybody, and this concludes the webinar. Goodbye and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.